My dear, there was a morning not too long ago when my grown son, eyes hardened, voice low, said to me, "You never helped me." And I just stood there, holding my breath like a dam about to break. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I simply opened my old email drafts and began, attaching every receipt I ever kept. If stories about quiet reckonings and loud silences speak to your soul, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a comment when your heart feels stirred, and share this with someone walking a similar road. Now come sit close, because this one was 27 years in the making. There was a blue plastic file box in the back of my closet. One of those with a cracked latch and labels faded from time. Inside were years of small things. Orthodontist copays, back-to-school receipts from Sears, soccer cleat tags, even a handwritten note from his fourth-grade teacher about how I stayed late to clean up after the Halloween party. None of it flashy. None of it Instagram-worthy. But each one, a tiny brick in the foundation I built for my boy. So when he told me I never helped, something didn't snap, it settled. Like dust after a storm. I spent that night scanning, sorting, and attaching. The next morning I pressed send, with fingers that trembled but didn't regret. What followed wasn't the apology I expected, but something far more revealing. Started with a Facebook post. Not one from him but from his wife. A little photo dump. Messy house, toddler tantrum, spilled cereal, captioned, "Doing it all alone like always, flex biceps, #momlife." I didn't comment. Didn't like it either. But it lodged itself in my chest like a thorn too deep to remove. That night I pulled out my journals. And that's when I found the letter. The one he wrote from college freshman year. Thanking me for everything. So what changed? I boiled a cup of chamomile, sat at the kitchen table, and reopened the folder marked Ben's school and medical. That's when the idea came. Maybe it was time he saw the ledger. Not for guilt. Not for glory. But because memory can be cruel, and silence even crueler. Ben was born on a sticky June morning, 3 weeks early and already determined to do things his own way. The nurses laughed at how loud he cried, how alert his eyes were. Like he was taking inventory of the world before he'd even taken his first proper breath. He was my first, and my only for a while. And I loved him with the kind of ache that wakes you in the night just to check if the baby's chest is still rising. His father, Robert, worked long hours at the mill, and I was teaching part-time back then, trying to stretch pennies into peace. We didn't have much, but I saved what I could. Not just money, memories. I kept his first crayon scribble, the receipt from his first haircut, the note from the pediatrician saying, "Ben is underweight but strong." I didn't call it record-keeping then. I called it hope. As he grew, so did the space between us. He was a quiet child, thoughtful but private, and I often had to guess what he needed before he asked. I made mistakes. Lord, I made more than a few. I missed a school play once because of a last-minute parent-teacher meeting. He never mentioned it, but he never invited me to another. When Robert passed, Ben was 16. Too old to cry in public, too young to carry that kind of grief. I watched him harden, as if grief was something he had to swallow whole. I offered therapy, time off school, even just silence. He took the last one and turned it into a wall. He left for college out of state and rarely came home. Our calls became shorter, more obligatory. I always sent care packages, always checked the bursar's bill. And when he graduated, I sat alone in the stadium bleachers, clapping like a fool who believed applause could mend anything. We drifted, as mothers and sons sometimes do when pride and misunderstanding settle in like stubborn weeds. But I never stopped trying. Birthday cards with gas money tucked inside. Christmas gifts for his wife even when she never acknowledged mine. And when their baby came, oh how I longed to be a part of that joy. But slowly my invitations were ignored. My calls went to voicemail. Then came that Thanksgiving, the one where he finally picked up the phone and said it outright. "You never really helped me, Mom. Not in the ways that counted." That sentence changed everything. Not because it was true, but because he believed it. The phone didn't even click when he said it. Just a dead silence that hung between us like a frayed rope. I could hear his breath on the other end, measured and final. And I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat down, lowered the receiver, and stared at the wall until the daylight had slipped behind the oaks. "You never really helped me, Mom." It echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had. That night I didn't sleep. I boiled water 3 times for tea and forgot the bag each time. Muffin, my old calico, curled beside me in concern. I finally pulled out the blue file box, the one I hadn't touched in years. I opened it like a wound. Inside it was all there. $48.75. Speech therapy, age 6. $289.99. Emergency dentist visit, age 10. $16.42. Last-minute poster board and markers for a science fair he never thanked me for. $82. College bus fare I wired in the middle of a snowstorm. And thousands more. Grocery lists with notes. Ben likes the green grapes. Handwritten reminders to schedule his allergy shots. Birthday party guest lists with addresses in my careful print. Every single one. Evidence of invisible love. I took a breath and began scanning them page by page. I stayed up until 3 a.m., my back aching, eyes burning. Each receipt was a memory. Each click of the scanner a heartbeat. I grouped them in folders. Medical, school, sports, college, baby gifts for their son. By morning I had over 200 files. I typed the email with trembling fingers. Dear Ben, I know memories change shape over time. I know mine are no longer yours. But you once thanked me and now you've forgotten. So here is what I kept. Not to prove you wrong, but to remind us both what love often looks like. Quiet, unspectacular but steady. Love, Mom. I attached every single file. Clicked send. Then I closed the laptop and waited. Hours passed. Then a day. Then 3. No reply. But on the 4th day my phone pinged. Not a message from Ben, but a forwarded email from his wife. Her subject line? Just one word. Wow. Her email was brief.
No greeting. No worms.
Just a cool clip sentence. I had no idea you were keeping score. That was it. I read it twice, then a 3rd time, searching for nuance, for some thread of grace. But there was none. Just those 10 words, like a door slammed shut in a quiet house. Keeping score? I sat with that accusation like a stone in my lap. Had I been? No. At least not in the way she meant. I hadn't saved those receipts out of resentment. I saved them because I was the kind of mother who couldn't bear to lose anything that marked my boy's life. I'd kept every little proof that I'd been there. Not to tally a debt, but to remember the texture of raising him. But it was clear now, they didn't see the same past I did. And in their version, my silence had been absence. My letting go had been interpreted as neglect. My faded boundaries drawn in kindness had made me a ghost. The next week they posted another photo. This time it was Ben holding their son, my grandson, in front of a little league sign-up table. The caption, "Doing this differently, blue heart #present dad." That one broke me. Not because I wasn't included. I'd grown used to that. But because it painted me out. Erased the years I stood at soccer sidelines in the rain, packed oranges for halftime, mended his jerseys when they tore. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter, Rachel. She'd seen the post too. "You okay, Mama?" I sent back just one word. Tired. That night I pulled the box of old tapes from the attic. Best recordings of school plays, birthday songs, and one where Ben is 6, sitting on the porch steps, eating watermelon with juice running down his chin. I played it on my old TV. The grainy screen flickered with his laughter. And I wept. Not because I wanted thanks, but because somewhere along the way, love had become invisible. And now it was being rewritten without me. I didn't hear from Ben for weeks. Not a text, not a call, not even a forwarded meme, the way we used to share small things when we didn't know how to say the big ones. But the silence wasn't empty. It was weighted, charged, like static in the air before a summer storm. Meanwhile, whispers began to float in from family. A cousin in Raleigh who mentioned Ben had said I was controlling. A former neighbor who heard I'd never really supported his choices. Each echo chipped at the edges of my memory, reshaping a mother's love into something strategic, transactional. I thought about calling him, thought about writing again, but I didn't. Instead, I went back through my journals. One entry dated September 3, 2008, read, "Ben's furious I won't co-sign for the off-campus apartment. He said I don't trust him. I want to, but I know I can't carry that loan if he flakes. I hope one day he understands. Another, from 2014. He asked for money again. Said I didn't help enough. But I had just sent rent last month. Is this what being a mother is now, an endless well? The pattern had been there all along, hadn't it? My giving. His forgetting. Then one morning Rachel showed up on my porch. Unannounced, coffee in hand. She sat beside me and said, "You know, I read your email. Ben forwarded it to me." I froze. She took my hand. "It wasn't scorekeeping, Mama. It was storytelling. And he's not ready to hear it." I didn't know he'd shared it. I didn't know she had seen my heart laid bare like that. Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to as a child. Sometimes people rewrite the past because it's easier than facing it. But you don't have to carry that silence. That night I wrote a letter. Not to Ben. To my grandson. I told him about the day his father was born. About the songs I used to hum to him in the bath. About the first time he tied his shoes, the first B on a spelling test, the last time he asked me to tuck him in. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I sealed it in an envelope, wrote his name in soft blue ink, and tucked it in the same box where I kept the receipts. Because one day he might ask. And when he does, I'll have more than silence to offer. It came quietly.
No fanfare, no apology.
Just a ping on my phone while I was folding laundry. A new email from Ben. Subject line. Okay. I opened it, half expecting a blank message or worse, another dismissal. But it was 4 short sentences. I read everything. I didn't realize how much you did.
I guess I forgot.
Or maybe I didn't want to remember. I need some space. That was it. For sentences that tried to untangle 27 years of motherhood, of birthdays and band-aids, scraped knees and scraped dreams. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, a faded pillow pressed to my chest. Space, he said. But hadn't I already been giving that? Hadn't I been shrinking myself for years just to fit into whatever shape he needed? Rachel came by later that evening, carrying Thai food and a bottle of ginger ale. I must have looked hollow because she wrapped me in a hug before saying a word. "I think he's hurting in ways he doesn't understand," she murmured. "But that doesn't make your pain any smaller, Mama." We sat in silence, the way people do when words aren't enough. After dinner, she found me in the living room, holding the envelope addressed to my grandson. "You should send it," she said gently. "Not to go around Ben, but so that one day, your story gets told by someone who lived it." I hesitated. "I don't want to turn love into leverage," I whispered. Rachel smiled sadly. "You're not. You're turning love into legacy." So I mailed it. Carefully. Quietly. I dropped it in the blue box at the corner of Myrtle and King Street, the same one where I once mailed birthday invites, college applications, and summer postcards. That night I dreamed of Ben as a little boy again, chasing fireflies in the backyard, his laughter like wind chimes. I woke up aching, and then the call came. Not from Ben. From his wife. She sounded tired. Flat. But not cruel. "He cried reading your email," she said. "But he won't admit it. He thinks you sent the letter to our son to shame him." I steadied my voice. "I sent it because I wanted our grandson to know where he came from. Not out of spite. Out of love." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Well, it landed. And not just with him." And just before she hung up, she added, almost like a confession, "I didn't have a mother like you." That was the breaking point. Not in rage but in truth. The truth that no amount of giving guarantees understanding. That even love, the deep and dutiful kind, can be misread when pain has rewritten the script. I sat alone after that call, letting the dusk settle around me like a worn shawl. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered to the silence. I did help. I did love. And I remember. It had been 2 months since the email, 2 months of limbo, of no thank you, no apology, no bridge extended. Just that quiet fracture running like a fault line between mother and son. The mornings felt longer. The kettle whistled too loud. I took longer walks, the kind where your thoughts chase you like shadows. Then, on a windy Thursday in October, I got the envelope. Not an email. Not a text. A real envelope. No return address. Just my name, Mom, in Ben's handwriting. I'd have known that slanted print anywhere. The M still leaned too far left, like it was afraid to commit. I held it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page. Lined paper. Torn from a notebook. I guess I thought parenting was only real if it was loud. If it was visible. Dad was gone and I needed to blame someone. You were always quiet. Doing things behind the scenes. I thought that meant you didn't care. But I read every receipt. Every note. Every time you wrote down something about me. And I realized, maybe I didn't feel helped because I never learned how to receive. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if it can be fixed. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it. Ben. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. The tears came slow at first, then in waves. Not of anger. Not even of relief. But of release. Because trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild like a fence. It grows back like ivy, slowly, tentatively, and only if both walls remain standing. I called Rachel and read the letter to her. She listened in silence. Then said, "That's more than I thought he'd ever say." Me too. But it didn't erase the hurt. It didn't erase the silence that came before. It just placed a hand over it. Gently. Like a bomb. That weekend, I sat on my porch and began writing again. Not to Ben, and not for our grandson, but for myself. For the woman who mothered in quiet corners and never asked for applause. I wrote, "Love is not owed, but it is remembered. Even if the remembering takes a lifetime." After the letter there was nothing. No phone call. No follow-up. No plans for Thanksgiving or, "Let's talk this through." Just silence, thick and neutral. Not hostile, not warm. Like winter air before the snow. I kept the letter on my nightstand. Read it sometimes before bed like a prayer with no ending. The days settled into routine. Early walks down Ashby Lane. Tea with Mrs. Coleman on Wednesdays. Feeding the birds out back. And in those still hours between dusk and supper, I started hearing the silence not as absence, but as space. Space to grieve. Space to breathe. Space to ask the harder question. What do I do when the story I told myself about motherhood no longer matches theirs? Because that's what it felt like now, two memoirs written in parallel. Mine tender and tired. His scarred and sure. And no editor in sight to stitch them together. Rachel came by less often. Life pulling her in other directions. My sister called to check in, but she never asked about Ben. I think she knew I couldn't talk about him without splintering. I went to church alone, sat in the back pew, listened to a sermon about forgiveness. How it's a door you can open even if the person on the other side never walks through. I held that thought for days. Let it sink like tea leaves in still water. At night, I'd hear echoes, not voices but memories. The sound of Ben's little feet running through the kitchen. The way he used to whisper, "Don't tell Daddy," when he snuck an extra cookie. I miss that boy. And I miss the version of myself who believed I could protect him from everything, including himself. But that woman was gone. In her place stood a quieter one. Still strong but weary. Wiser but lonelier. I began sleeping with the window open. Something about the wind felt honest. Like it carried the voices of other mothers, other sons, all learning how to love each other across growing distances. When you raise a child, my dear, no one tells you that the letting go won't just be of their little hands, but of your very identity. In the quiet weeks that followed, I found myself drifting through rooms with a kind of bone-deep tiredness, not from age, but from untangling the ache of being misunderstood for so long. I'd always believed I was the steadfast one, the dependable, invisible kind of love. But now I began to wonder, had my steadiness looked like distance to him? Had my restraint felt like indifference? One rainy afternoon, I pulled down the mirror from the hallway, the old one with the gilded frame, and set it on the dining room table. I lit a candle, not for ritual but for clarity. Then I looked at myself. Really looked. 70 years of life stared back. Laugh lines, grief lines, and eyes that had seen too much without speaking enough of it. I whispered aloud. Did I fail you, Ben? Or did you just not know what to do with the way I loved? That's the question that hollowed me out. Because motherhood, for all its sweetness, is a kind of erasure too. You give and give until you disappear into the scaffolding of someone else's story. I started journaling again, But this time not as his mother. As Ellie. As the woman who once had dreams of writing a poetry book, who loved jazz records and rainy Sundays, who fell in love with a boy named Robert who kissed her hand like she was rare. The more I wrote, the more I remembered who I was before I became mom. And slowly, almost tenderly, I let go of the fantasy that Ben would return with apologies wrapped in ribbon. I stopped checking the mailbox for another letter, stopped refreshing my email, not out of bitterness, but out of mercy for myself. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a mother can do is step out of the shadows of her own sacrifices and see herself again. The first snowfall came early that year, just a soft dusting, barely enough to coat the azaleas. I was sitting by the window, cat curled at my feet, when I heard the crunch of tires in the gravel drive. No one visits unannounced these days, so I stayed seated, cautious. Then came the knock. Not loud, not hurried. I opened the door, and there stood Ben, taller than I remembered, paler too. He held something in his hands. A small box. His eyes met mine, and for a second, neither of us spoke. The wind carried a single dry leaf between us like some quiet offering. He cleared his throat. I wasn't sure if you'd answer. I didn't reply, just stepped aside. He walked in slowly, the way you do in a house you used to know but aren't sure you're welcome in anymore. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he once spilled orange juice on his math homework, where I once bandaged a scraped knee and kissed it like that would fix anything. He placed the box between us. I found this in your letter. The part about the grapes. And the Halloween party. And, I don't know, it made me remember differently. He opened the lid. Inside were a handful of photos. Old ones. Me holding him at 3 months. Him in his Little League uniform. Me in the bleachers, clapping. Even one of the science fair project. The one he said I never helped with. I didn't know Dad took these, he said softly. I didn't know you kept them. I smiled. I kept everything. Ben looked down. Fidgeted. I'm sorry, Mom. For forgetting. For being cruel. I thought I needed to protect my version of the past. But I see now, I built that version on shadows. There it was. Not a perfect apology, but a gesture. Unscripted. Real. He stayed for tea. Talked about his son. How he reminds him of himself. How hard it is, this parenting thing, when you're still trying to heal from the way you were raised. Before he left, he hugged me. Not the quick, polite kind. A full hug. Long and trembling. And just before he stepped outside, he turned back and said, You helped me, Mom. I just didn't know how to name it. The weeks that followed felt like early spring. Not yet warm, but no longer winter. There was a thaw, slow and tender. Ben didn't call every day, but he called. Sometimes just to ask for a recipe, sometimes to share something his son had said, sometimes to say nothing at all. Each time, I listened like it was a new language I was learning. And perhaps it was the language of rebuilding. One morning he emailed me a photo. His son, my grandson, eating green grapes out of a little bowl. He said he likes the tart ones. Just like I used to. It was the first time he'd acknowledged the small inheritances that pass from mother to child. The ones we don't even know we're giving. Rachel came over and found me hanging fresh curtains in the guest room. You expecting company? She asked, raising a brow. I just smiled. Not yet. But someday maybe. And sure enough, one weekend in March, Ben called and said they'd like to visit, just for a day. No big plans, no expectations. He arrived with his son asleep in the car seat, his wife carrying a store-bought pie and an uncertain look in her eyes. But the moment they stepped over the threshold, it felt like an old rhythm trying to remember itself. We sat on the porch that afternoon, his son chasing butterflies in the yard. Ben leaned over and asked, Do you still have that file box? I nodded. He said, Would you show it to me sometime? All of it. Not the receipts, the stories. I blinked back tears. It's all in there. But I'll tell them too. Later that evening, his wife stood beside me in the kitchen while I dried dishes. She looked at me and said softly, I didn't know how to be a daughter-in-law to someone like you. You didn't ask for anything. And that made me feel like I had to prove myself, constantly. I turned to her gently. We were both trying to protect our families. We just forgot we were part of the same one. That night, when they left, Ben hugged me again. No words this time, just warmth. Just presence. And for the first time in a long, long time, I slept through the night without dreaming of what could have been. Because now we were building what might still be. They came again 2 weeks later.
No occasion.
No holiday. Just a soft knock on a Saturday morning, a smile through the screen door, and the sound of a little boy's laughter trailing up my walk like wind chimes in the breeze. Grandma Ellie, he called me. My knees nearly gave out. Ben had told me they'd been calling me Grandma, at home. Gently, slowly, like unlearning a habit. But to hear it out loud? To have it spoken with such ease from a child who'd never really known me? That was grace. Pure and unexpected. We spent the afternoon piecing together a puzzle on the porch, drinking lemonade too tart, just the way Ben liked it when he was little. I watched him watching his son, the way he crouched beside him, offered encouragement, celebrated small things. He was showing up. In a way I had always prayed he might. At one point he turned to me and said, "You used to do this, didn't you? Sit with me like this." I smiled. Every summer afternoon like it was my job. His wife joined us later, settling beside me with a cup of tea.
No tensión.
Just quiet companionship. She asked about my garden, complimented my roses, even offered to help replant the hydrangeas come spring. Rachel came by, surprised to see all the cars in my driveway. "You hosting a revival?" she teased. "Something like that," I said, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "A resurrection of sorts." That evening Ben asked if he could look through the box, the blue plastic one. We sat on the living room floor like we used to, papers spread around us. He picked up each one carefully, like they were artifacts from a forgotten civilization. "This," he said, holding a faded note I'd written to his teacher in 4th grade. "This was the field trip I didn't want to go on. And I made you go anyway," I smiled. "Because new experiences matter." He looked at me, eyes softer now. "You were always steering. I just thought you were pushing." "No," I said gently. "Just guiding. Until you could take the wheel." He stayed until dark. Helped tuck his son into the guest room bed. Kissed my cheek before leaving. And as he stood in the doorway he whispered, "Thank you. For helping me." Even when I couldn't see it. The spring rains came in early this year, soft and warm. The kind that made the roses bloom before their time. I stood on the porch one morning, coffee in hand, listening to the rhythm of water on tin, when my phone buzzed. It was a video message. From Ben. I hesitated, then pressed play. There he was, sitting beside his son, who was holding up a poster board covered in glued macaroni and glitter. "This is our family tree," the little boy announced proudly, pointing. "That's Daddy, that's Mommy, that's me. And that's Grandma Ellie." My breath caught. Ben leaned into the frame, smiling, and said, "We talked about what helping really looks like. And he said Grandma Ellie helped by loving us first." I clutched the phone to my chest like it was sacred. Because in that moment everything I'd poured into that child, the receipts, the scraped knees, the quiet sacrifices, the absence of thanks, it had all flowed forward. It had taken root. It had grown. Love, my dear, is not a loan we expect repayment on. It's a legacy we pass down quietly. Ben called that evening.
No tensión.
No performance. Just a son talking to his mother. "I'm thinking about therapy," he said. "I've got some things to unlearn." "I'll walk beside you," I replied. "No," he said. "I think I need to walk it. But knowing you're there, that helps." The next week he invited me to his son's piano recital. Front row. My name on the program. I went, wore my best cardigan, and clapped until my hands stung. When his son bowed, he glanced at me and grinned. Ben reached over and held my hand. No words. Just presence. And presence, I've learned, is the loudest kind of love. The roses bloomed heavy that summer. Soft pinks, buttery yellows, deep crimson like old velvet. I spent mornings tending them, humming songs from the jazz records Robert and I used to dance to in the kitchen. The air smelled of lavender and sun-warmed earth. One afternoon, a little hand slipped into mine. "Grandma Ellie," my grandson said, eyes wide beneath his curls. "Did my daddy cry when he was little?" I smiled. "Oh, sweetheart. Your daddy cried all the time. For lost toys, scraped knees, And once because the moon disappeared behind a cloud and he thought it wouldn't come back. He giggled, then ran off to chase the cat. And I stood there, hands still warm, heart full. Ben was inside helping Rachel fix the porch screen. His laughter, deeper now worn with time, floated out the open window. There had been no grand apology, no perfect moment of reckoning, just slow growth, tender repair. That's how love survives after hurt. Not with fireworks but with a willingness to plant again. The blue file box still sits in the hallway closet. But now beside it, there's a small journal. New pages filled with drawings, notes, and stories from a little boy who already knows his history starts with more than just names on a tree. It starts with love. And love, my dear, leaves a paper trail. Quiet, crinkled, and indelible. My dear. If my son said, "You never helped me." So I emailed him every receipt. Stirred something familiar in your soul. I hope you'll leave a note below and tell me what part lingered. Was it the silence? The hurt? Or maybe the quiet kind of forgiveness that doesn't come with fanfare? Just time? If this story reminded you of someone, a mother, a child, a friend who misunderstood your heart, share it with them. Let it be a bridge. And if you'd like to sit with more stories like this one, full of memory, meaning, and a bit of mending, I'd love for you to subscribe. I'll be right here, waiting.